I'm Sally Kilpatrick with my book Bless Your Heart, and you're watching Author's Voice.
Hi everyone, welcome to Author's Voice, connecting authors to the world. This is Lit with Love and I am your host, Sonali Dev. And today we're going to be speaking with the utterly delightful Sally Kilpatrick. Do I say that right? Sure. Because I mean, I want to say that last name in so many different ways every time I read it. Anyway, so we're talking to Sally about her delightful book. And I'm going to say the word delightful a lot because that's exactly what this book is. Bless Her Heart. Super title envy again. It's such a great title. But Bless Her Heart is the story of Posey Love, who is just coming out of a horrendous marriage and trying to find her feet and find happiness and learn to life again, find herself again. And she has a very interesting way of doing it, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that. And it has to do with the 7 deadly sins.
Of course, as one does.
Yes. And I also wanted to thank Kensington Books, the publisher, and let you know that you can right now buy a signed copy of Bless Her Heart. It is $15. And I believe there's a button beneath the screen that you can click, A, to buy the book, and please do that, and B, to send us questions live so you can be part of the conversation. So welcome. Welcome, Sally. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And Sally just drove in this morning from Atlanta. I'm not drove in, flew in this morning. All right, so you want to tell us a little bit about the book and where it came from and introduce it to the audience?
Sure. I had a vision of this woman who was torn between her Baptist grandmother and her hippie mother. So that's kind of where it started. And then I was actually sitting in Ash Wednesday service, and it occurred to me, oh, she's going to give up church for Lent, because that makes sense. So, and from there, it snowballed with the 7 deadly sins, and then I fell down the Christian domestic discipline rabbit hole, which we can talk about later if you want to, or not.
No, we're going to be, because, yes, we're going to be talking about it, because I don't read a whole lot of what we call in the romance world, inspirational romance, and I'm reading this book and going, I didn't know Sally wrote inspirationals. Is that what this is? And I was a little bit like, okay, but it's not really.
No, well, it's a gritty, I like to call it a gritty inspirational. Fortunately, I can put my books under Southern fiction, which is a nice, great umbrella, because when I was getting ready to sell the Happy Hour Choir, which also had romantic elements, it had too much of the secular world in it for religious houses and too much of the religious for some of the regular houses. So Kensington was nice enough to give me a spot for a book that kind of straddled more than one genre. Definitely, there's a lot of religion in this. For one thing, she's a preacher's wife. And for another, my hero may or may not quote Song of Solomon to her.
At a very, very key time.
Yes. Yes, because nothing says sexy times like your navel is a goblet.
Yes. Especially when he's drinking something out of it.
You know.
So, yeah, I mean, okay, so let's step back, because there's like so much in there to unpack. So here we have Posey.
Yes.
Who's kind of torn between her hippie mother and feels her character is informed a lot by the fact that her mother was this hippie, broke the rules kind of girl. She was a teenage pregnancy. Posey doesn't know who her father is, and it hasn't done good things for her and her self-esteem, and it kind of almost leads her to this horrendous marriage. Well, so tell us about Chad. Where on earth did he come from? Because I swear I wanted to kill him with my bare hands.
It was a hard book to write too, because you want your heroines to be very strong, but I also think it's important to realize that smart, intelligent, strong women sometimes make bad decisions, and they shouldn't really be penalized for it. In Posey's case, she ends up with Chad because it's a reaction to what had happened to her when she was younger. So here she is, and her mother's making her clothes out of hemp, and her mother's like broken all the rules, and she's in this small town, so people are constantly blessing her heart. And she hates it. She hates the pity. So out of that, she decides the one thing she wants is she wants a very stable home environment. She wants to be a homemaker. She wants a very, a traditional marriage with a traditional man. And Chad is one of those manipulative kind of guys who tells you one thing, and then maybe a little later you find out that's not who he is at all.
Yeah, I mean, really, in my book, he's a complete monster. Like,
he is.
Really, and yet, you're absolutely right. You can tell, how he reels her in. It's almost, picture book of what to avoid in terms of abuse, and how men who abuse both emotionally and physically get perfectly smart, strong women to kind of get into these situations, right?
Definitely plays into gaslighting.
And I'm so glad you used that word, because here's the other thing I wanted to talk about. There's this moment in the book when Rain, her little sister, who's a fabulous character, and we'll come back and talk about her, but she puts that label on what he's been doing.
Yes.
And we live in a time where there's labels for everything now, right?
Yes.
And it can get tiresome, but I'm a huge proponent of it, because I think that it works so well to be able to name things and name feelings and name syndromes or what's going on, to be able to deal with it.
Exactly.
Right? And to not make it feel like you're so abnormal or so alone.
Well, I think that might have been a little bit of therapy for me too. I mean, in one of my past relationships, I was gaslit, and I didn't know what it was. This is before the internet had really taken off. And I'd never seen the movie. I'd never heard the term. And then I realized as I was writing this book, I'm like, "Ooh, you are exorcising some demons, Miss Kilpatrick." So, yeah, and that kind of goes along with the taking the wives submit to your husbands to the extreme.
Okay.
That's a part of it that plays into it too.
And the gaslighting wasn't it going to its extreme. You have a scene in the book where it does get to a point.
Yes. Well, the gaslighting, he uses that strategy until she catches on to him, and she gains her self-esteem and kind of kicks him to the curb. And then, of course, then he's interested in her again, because now he's not going to be outdone. And yes, then he decides to actually spank her. And I'm like, oh no, dude. Oh no.
Yeah, no, I was oh no, dude to you on that. I'm like, you did not just make me read that. You did not just do that to me.
Hey, now I did have another character with a taser.
Yep. And I love that. I'm like, is he shaking? What just happened? What? And I love that she has a pink glittery taser.
That is a pink taser. Well, Google is an amazing thing. And if they ever check my search engine, I'm probably going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, mine too. So such flawed characters, right? I mean, one of the things here was that each one of them is, I mean, there isn't a single character in there who's Mary Sue, or, who you feel like, doesn't need to do any growing or changing. It's some very, very seriously flawed characters. Is that, was that a process thing for you?
I think that's how all of my characters, for the most part, tend to come out, because I think that's the way we as people are. sometimes my characters probably have more wrong with them than the average person, sometimes not, but that's why I would call it more of a gritty inspirational. My stories are going to come out with at least a happy for now, because as my mother says, if you want something sad, you can always read the news. But in the meantime, you know, you want to take a look at how people really are. I don't think you have much of a story if people have nowhere to go, if they're already perfect.
Right, and one of the things that kind of captures that is we have her working at as a receptionist at one church in the beginning, and she's this one person. And then you have her at the end doing the exact same thing, but it's a completely different person and a completely different thing. And,
exactly.
It's, yeah, I think that
I like to bookend if I can. It doesn't always work, but for this story, I was like, oh, this is going to come down nicely. This is going to bookend.
Yes. And again, send us questions. I do have one question here, Sally.
Okay.
So let's take a break from my questions for this. This is from Vinny in Mobile. Thanks, Vinny. And she wants to know, why is the South the best place to set a romance story?
Oh, so many reasons. I'm thinking for one thing, though, being here in Chicago, you don't have to always wear a winter coat in the South. And that makes it easier to that makes it easier to kiss and hug and whatnot. That's always good. For me, the South is the place that I know best, so that's why I tend to set them there. And also I find that you get a wonderful cast of quirky characters. You're always going to have different families. I have one book where they start singing hymns in the middle of the produce section of the Piggly Wiggly. You can't do that in a book that's not set in the South. In this book, they go to a pole dancing studio called the Pole Cat. Again, you can't do that unless you're in the South. So
while we're talking about quirky, you want to tell us where the Tom Brokaw story came from?
That would be an example of every now and then my characters will say something that even surprised me. And in this case, Posey's grandmother is suffering from dementia, and Posey thinks she's going to be nice, and she asks Grandma what she wants for Christmas, and Grandma says Tom Brokaw, and she's like, what? And she's like, I don't know that I can do that, Grandma. And so Grandma keeps rocking the little crib with the baby doll in it, and she's like, besides, he owes me child support. And you're like, oh my gosh, Grandma thinks she has Tom Brokaw's love child. And I think that goes back to my Aunt Dot, my mom's older sister, had a crush on Peter Jennings. And when I was younger, I'm like, Peter Jennings, really? And I think that it just kind of popped out. Maybe I'd been reading The Greatest Generation and I decided to transfer from Peter Jennings to Tom Brokaw. But things happen. Things happen in fiction.
Things happen in fiction, and this was fabulous because
she's got Tom Brokaw's love child.
Yep.
Which I'm sure is a surprise to him.
Yes, please, Tom, if you're watching, send Granny the checks. Okay, but there's also this whole, so you do go to some dark places also.
I do.
There's a lot of laughs in here, but you handle addiction, abuse. Tell me how, in terms of research, A, you know, what was the impetus for that? Where did that come from? And B, what kind of research did that involve?
Well, I'm thinking of Henny first. Henny he's a passing character. He's Posey's brother, and he is on heroin, and it started with the opioids and that his baseball coach gave him to keep him playing. And I just touched on that. I think I came across a story about it. Of course, opioids are rampant in our neighborhoods. For John O'Brien, I was thinking about this character. He's very, very Baptist in all of the best ways to be Baptist, and yet he wanted to be a rock and roll star. So he goes off and he becomes a roadie, and he kind of gets into the partying lifestyle, and he starts drinking to the point where he's drinking too much. So he's my alcoholic character. And I did a lot of Googling on that. I read some firsthand accounts. I remember one of the things was, you get a plant and then you can get a dog. So I thought to myself, this is the kind of character that if you told him, well, if you can progress to the next stage, you can have a plant, then he's going to have a hothouse. But yet he didn't want the dog because that would mean that he was that much closer to like a new romantic relationship. So I had the dog come to him. And that scene unfortunately got cut because originally I wrote this in third person and then I switched it to first person for Posey. So when it went to first person, I lost his POV, but that's what happened with him and the dog. And I have that scene. I'm probably going to send it out in a newsletter soon.
Wow. Yeah. I wanted to know more what was going on with him, because he falls off the wagon, which
he does fall off the wagon.
Which again, as a romance hero, it's hard as a reader to see that happen.
Well, I mean, and I don't want to give away spoilers, but he makes a mistake, and yet it's an honest mistake. And I think that that's part of the human condition too, and that we don't need to be so rigid in whether or not we give forgiveness to other people. And that's probably a lot of what happens in the second half of the book. You can be very devout and still make mistakes and still come up a little short, still need forgiveness. So that's where he is. And that's part of what the end scene is. So she starts off the book in a church and she ends the book in a church. And they're just two completely different situations. Yeah. Yes, because the first church is one that's based a lot on being judgmental and on having prescribed roles and not breaking any of the rules. And the second church comes from more of a place of love.
Yeah, and it's judgment, I think, is one of the things I wrote down was as a theme. That's probably the most overarching theme of the book, although there are several, because Rain's character, and again, polecat,
yes,
and here you have this really smart teenager who is who's going to do something that would be
law school, and yet she's already plotted out. She's like, if I want to go to law school, that's going to be very expensive, and what's one good way for me to make money? Why, I shall dance around a pole because I am very limber. And then her sister, who's been judged all her life for things that weren't even her fault, turns around and judges her little sister. And she's like, whoa, 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 my life, my decision.
Yeah, and even Lark, her mother's character, I think was really interesting because she's this hippie mom who runs a Whole Food store, or, and things like a yoga studio
/ natural foods, remedies, what have you.
Yeah, and you have that character, and yet she herself, to me, seemed like she has such a conservative soul.
She is. Yeah. She's judgmental too. Like she's been trying to run away from it her whole life in reaction to her own mother, which I think we all do to some extent. At least at some point we rebel against our own mothers. And then, if you're me, you're smart, and you go back to, oh, mom's always right. But, not for Lark. And yet at her core, she's not really a free love.
She's not.
Let's take drugs hippie. She just thinks she is.
Yeah, and right. And to me, religion often comes with that, with chains, for lack of a better word, not faith, but religion.
It's more things. Thou shalt not than thou shalt.
Right. Yeah, and especially that whole structured, organized religion thing always comes with those thou shalt nots. And if you consider yourself a free spirit in any way, you're going to, and when that combined with youth hormones generally does none of it, right? And so talk a little bit about her, the seven deadly sins.
7 deadly sins?
Yeah, that, and how giving up Lent ties into all of that.
Okay, so
not giving up Lent, but giving up church for Lent.
Yes. Well, that plays into the fact that Lark, now that she's older, she's gone into the Methodist Church. And I knew from growing up in a small town, and I went to the Methodist Church, but I also spent a lot of time in the Baptist church with friends of mine, and I knew that they didn't celebrate Lent. And in fact, my Methodist church growing up didn't. That was something that came along later. And I'm realizing I've got this character who's been immersed in one religion, finding herself suddenly in a different church, in a different place, and she has this reaction. She's like, oh my gosh, this is like a cult. And I did that because I was thinking, you know, it's got to be pretty weird if you walk into the Methodist church and everybody stands up and starts singing the same song and then starts doing the Apostles' Creed. They start chanting together. So as she's sitting there and they start talking about Lent, because it's Ash Wednesday, you know, she's got the whole, the ashes and everything, and they're talking about giving something up to make yourself a better person or adding something to your routine. She's like, well, the one thing that I have had entirely too much of in my life is church. I'm going to give up church. So that's what she does. And her sister, Rain, is actually Catholic because her father is Santiago, and she goes to Catholic church with her father and her grandmother. And she's like, so what are you going to do next? You're going to tackle the 7 deadly sins? And it kind of starts off as a joke, and they attack gluttony with relish. I mean, they go out and they have nachos and way too many tequila shots. Well, partially Rain talks her into it because Rain's underage. So Rain's like, if you don't drink that, I'm going to. Kind of.
That works.
But, and once she's checked off gluttony and accidentally checked off sloth when she stays home and reads because she's hungover. And then she ends up with a little bit of lust because, well, John O'Brien.
Yes.
And from there, she's like, well, what the hey? I might as well finish them all out. Except for, of course, pride. Pride's the one she thinks she hasn't committed. And then at the very end, she's like, oh.
That was the big
line.
To
think that I could give up church for Lent, that was pretty prideful.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how she does the, you know, the ones that she rates them.
Yes.
She rates the
As
sins.
she goes through, she'd be like, lust is my favorite. Or my personal favorite, she'd do gluttony is my favorite. And then the next morning she wakes up hungover, gluttony is not my favorite.
Yes. And speaking of lust,
yes,
there's a lot of references to that book.
Ah, yes.
So you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I had a person actually ask me in a private message once, and I think actually I've had 2 people ask me this. Now, why I'm the arbiter of Christian values, I don't know. I wouldn't recommend coming to me, but they're like, do you think I'm going to hell because I read that book? And for those of you who are wondering, that book is indeed 50 Shades of Grey. For real, I got a message that said, do you think I'm going to hell because I read 50 Shades of Grey? And I'm thinking to myself, did you kill somebody? Did you steal something? You coveting your neighbor's wife? What's going on here? And that kind of made its way into the book. Now, as a writer, particularly one that writes anything romantic, like I think this is classified as mainstream with romantic elements, you really want to stay away from criticizing any book. But yet I tried so hard to write that out of this and it wouldn't, the story had to stay. Like I had to have that character come and ask my preacher's wife, am I going to hell because I read 50 Shades of Grey? And that kind of snowballed into a great discussion though between Posey and Rain about consent really and about what it meant.
Yes, and herself actually discovering a love of romance novels.
Indeed, yes. She thought, well, I mean, if you're in the middle of a bad marriage, maybe you don't believe in happily ever after. So Rain hooked her up, gave her several books for her to read on Sloth Day.
On Sloth Day,
I think we should all institute Sloth Day.
I would say that's every day for me because, you know, I mean, a day without reading isn't a day.
Indeed.
So that's, again, I mean, I keep coming back to the addiction and the abuse. Was there research involved? Did you need, was it just the characters who told you how they were going to be?
Mainly the characters kind of told me. They do that a lot. They'll tell, like I said, like Grandma tells me she thinks she has Tom Brokaw's love child, and I obviously just roll with it. And it's the same with John O'Brien. I knew that, well, I'd already written a short story, and that's when it happened. It surprised me. I have a little bitty mini short where John visits a previous character of mine, Beulah Land, in the middle of a bar, and she goes to buy him a beer, and he's like, I don't drink anymore. And that kind of stuck in my brain, and then a few years later, here I am writing the story and realizing, oh yeah, John's a recovering alcoholic. That's
perfect.
That's part of his journey.
Because she's going also from, so to me, the way I was raised, weirdly enough, there was the 3 reasons that break a marriage up are addiction, abuse, and adultery.
Okay.
Right?
And well, we covered those in Posey's first marriage.
Right? But she goes from 2 to the threat of 1, right? And that's a pretty brave choice as an author to make with a character who's coming from. So did you think about that at all? Was it?
I think I have some kind of crazy need to write heroes that people wouldn't necessarily write. I say this because, well, book 3 is about a funeral director, but you know what? Funeral directors need love too. And or maybe my farmer. He's not even a cowboy. In book 2, he's a poor dirt farmer. In book 1, it's a minister, just a small church minister. And then here in book 4, I've got a piano tuner who's a recovering alcoholic. I guess it's just these characters come to me and I'm like, oh, these guys, they deserve love too. We have enough books about billionaires. We don't need that in our life.
Yeah. Firefighters, billionaires.
Yeah, I'll let somebody else write those stories.
No, it's awesome because it is, he doesn't have his happily ever after or his happily for now in terms of his addiction. And yet you feel kind of hopeful at the end of the book.
Oh,
that
I think
he's going
so.
to.
I think he had to fall off the wagon to realize he could get back on. I think up until that point he was just like deathly afraid of what would happen, and he needed to have this moment to say, you know what, I'm bigger than this. I can handle this.
Yeah, and there's good impetus at that point too, right? With with what happens, no spoilers, but there's this whole theme of motherhood and how because there's like we said, so much of what these women are trying to do with their own lives has to do with what their mothers have expected from them or who their moms were, and Posey has this burning need to be a mother.
That's part of the reason why she ended up with Chad. She wanted desperately to be a mother, and when she was younger, she had this foolish idea that she would be so much better at motherhood than her mother.
Like we all do, right?
Well, I wasn't under that particular impression.
I was until I had the kids, maybe.
But even so, I must text my mother like once a week to say, remember, blah, 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 blah. I am so sorry. I'm sorry I did that.
Yeah, I do think that to myself a lot too. Oh, I did this to my mom. Now I know what it felt like.
Yeah, exactly.
But also Lisa and Liza.
Liza.
Mm-hmm. She was Lisa in my head, so
it happens.
Liza. Yes. So girl friendships, a lot of fabulous feminine bonding in here. Is that also a theme through all the books? And
I try to have my female characters have friends and have them discuss something other than the boys they date. I partially want to pass the Bechdel test, but in the case of Liza, a really neat thing happened with her. I put up a character for auction for a benefit, a church benefit actually, and the person who won wanted me to name the character Liza, and I just asked a few questions, and just with those like 2 questions and the name, that character really took off, and she was so much fun to write. A new mother who she's sleep deprived. She hadn't had a shower in a week. If you're a mother, you've been there, and yet she's trying to be the best friend she can to this girl that she grew up with. So yeah, I like their bond. I like the fact that she helps Posey out.
Yeah, and it's we find them at a moment when Posey is now ready for help. So I also kept thinking about how hard these past few years were on Liza, because and we've all had the seen our friends go through things and they're not receptive, and so she's been in that state, so she's almost like, oh, now I can help her.
Yes, but I mean, they don't start off They don't start off all lovey-dovey either, because Posey has to lock herself out of the house and call Liza to let her back in, and they kind of go back and forth and kind of, where have you been and why are you like this, and Liza doesn't like Chad, which shows that she's a good judge of character. And so the part of the book is they're getting to a point where at one point Posey's painting Liza's toenails while they have kind of a slumber party of sorts. But that takes a while. You got to get through the whole 300 pages to get there.
Yeah, and they've been friends since high school, so there's that good solid foundation there. But it's I did want to go back and give you a moment to talk about, well, two things I wanted to talk about. So and we're coming to the end of the show, but the whole disciplinarian husband thing, that's a thing. I mean, I thought that was like
that's a thing.
An old Indian thing. But
so I Googled wives submit to your husbands, and I was thinking about people who took that too far, who really just took that verse and ran with it without thinking about the one that came after that. And I stumbled across this thing called Christian domestic discipline, which, if you want to Google it, do so at your own risk. But basically, the husband is in charge of the family, and he can punish his wife. Like, let's say she uses foul language. He can have her put a bar of soap in her mouth, just like you would a kid, or spank her, or send her to the corner. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh, no. No way would this fly in my household. But as I'm reading it, I'm realizing this is exactly the kind of person Chad is. He would he would get his jollies from being that in control.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that, that so many religious interpretations have, have something like that, because there's other religions in the world that we kind of really, really blackface and shameface for the exact same thing.
Yes.
So yeah, to me that was like, all right.
It's a thing.
Yeah,
it's a thing.
Wow.
I'm afraid it's a thing.
Wow. Yeah, we're almost out of time, but I did want to tell our readers that that Sally is a superstar on Twitter. So follow her. She is, really badass on Twitter, more than just. So you want to talk about quickly about how that's been with the whole interesting political climate and your Twitter persona?
Oh yeah, I'm Super Writer Mom on Twitter, and I've had several authors tell me not to talk about politics, and I do it anyway. So far, so good. I don't really talk about politics so much as the way I think we ought to treat each other, which informs the Christianity that's in my books, and probably why that's never neat or cut and dry or fit into a box. Because, we're messy people. And I go on my little ranty, I put on my ranty pants on Twitter sometimes.
And we love it.
It happens.
I love it, for sure. It was, so continue the conversation, and you get to see real Sally on Twitter.
Sure, yeah, ask me questions on Twitter if you want to. I'll answer them as soon as my phone is charged.
Oh gosh, it could be a while. So we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having
Sally.
me.
Is there anything you wanted to say before I take us out?
No, other than thanks for having me.
Thanks, wonderful. Where Sally's going to stay with me, and we're going to have some fun. So we will get out of here, and I will take the viewers out. Again, we were discussing Bless Her Heart by Sally Kilpatrick, and it is available in ebook and print, but you can get a signed copy by clicking the button here.
I will even bless your heart in the book. In the good way, not the bad way, in the good way.
In the good way. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the show, you can still go to authorsvoice.net and order the book, a signed copy. So please do that. Let me see. Thank you, Kensington Books, for sending us Sally and her books. And I am going to introduce, or rather to leave you with, upcoming shows on Author's Voice. And they are on Stranger Than Fiction, December 8th, 3:30, Gail Lucasix, White Like Her, which sounds fabulous. Again, on Stranger Than Fiction, December 9th at noon, Joan Mary Johnson's Funding Feminism. Okay, Berta's Books, December 12th at 2:30 p.m. with author Sarah Miller and her new book, Caroline, Little House Revisited. And then on Lit with Love, on January 10th at 2 p.m., I will be back with Kristen Higgins and her fabulous new book, Now That You Mention It. So please do join us for that. All of these details are also available on authorsvoice.net. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can still order. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Sally, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.